Hello and welcome to Full Disclosure, a podcast project that was conceived entirely to let me spend more time with interesting people than I would ever get on the radio. And this week's episode is a bit different for at least two reasons, Bryony Gordon. The first is that the art of the interview is often designed to glean information that may not have been previously available, and yet your canon of work is an extraordinary confessional account of your own life and time. So I don't imagine that you've left much in the locker for me to discover today.
Some.
And the second is that of all the Full Disclosure guests I've ever had, I think I've known you for the longest, albeit that we kind of knew each other 20 odd years ago and haven't seen much of each other since.
It was 25 years
was
ago.
It? A very long time ago.
It was a lot, yes. But I remember you were one of the first people I met in journalism.
Yes.
And you were very kind.
Oh, that's a relief.
And I, you and your wife, I've always felt very fondly.
Well, that's good to know, because some of the stuff that you wrote about, perhaps in your first book, I kind of recognised. I was there for some of it, and we may get onto that, we may not. So, to begin at the beginning, or at least a little later than the beginning, you wanted to be a journalist pretty much from the get-go. Your mum, Jane Gordon, is a journalist, and that was the path that you saw ahead of you from a very early age.
Yes, good old-fashioned nepotism, James.
Not really. Nepotism gets you through the door.
Yeah, I know.
It doesn't necessarily enable you to stay there. But of course, lots of people listening will wonder how the hell they're ever going to get through the door.
Yeah, no, I just loved journalism. I loved newspapers. They were sort of always there on the table when I would go down, for breakfast in the morning, and I was surrounded by journalists, and I thought it was very exciting. And I remember that. It was like watching a movie, opening the newspaper and what was going to be on the next page and the next page, and I always remember things like on a Sunday being very excited to see what was going to be on the front page of the News of the World. That was how we used to get all the goss.
Yes, absolutely, and there was proper goss as well.
It never really. I wanted to play for Arsenal, but back then there were not many opportunities for women to do that, or to be a marine biologist. Sadly, science was not my forte. So I ended up going and doing work experience at the Express, which is where I met you, and I lived happily ever after.
Well, because you were a beautiful writer, that was evident from the very start. I think, for the record, we should stress that the Express at the time was for my record, not so much for yours, was a very liberal project, and not necessarily a possibly doomed project in populist liberalism that was being presided over by Rosie Boycott, and owned at the time by the Labour peer Lord Hollick. It was a very different beast from what it is now. And you, I think, were able. We've jumped ahead a little bit, but you like me actually. You were able to almost carve your own niche over time.
Yeah.
There.
I wrote about being a teenager.
Yes.
Which was bonkers when I think about it now.
But you were a teenager.
I was a teenager.
So it would have been even more bonkers had you been 54.
No, that would have been very strange. But that sort of freedom some of the things I just wrote about why I think about it. I wrote about things like why I hated Easter.
Yes.
I love Easter. Topical. I remember fox hunting had just been banned, and people were in a terrible tiz about it. And I remember writing about, talking about how it was very important to be able to cull foxes. And I remember writing something about how I was like, well, why don't you see hunts go down Brixton High Street? Because there's a fuck of a lot of foxes in South London. But it was fun, and it was such a great time. And also, I've never really had that thing of, I suppose, in a parallel universe, in an easy life, I work for The Guardian and I live in North London, and life is really easy, and I'm with my people the whole time, and I'm just listening to people that have the same opinions as me. But that is not what the universe had planned for me, So I've always worked for more right of centre publications, even if I'm rather a bit more left of centre.
Well, yes, because arguably the people who most need to read the kind of work that you do may be the people who are more likely to be reading the kind of organs that you've worked for, or at least they're less likely to have access to it elsewhere. They're less likely to be hearing this stuff elsewhere. Did it live up to your early expectations? Because I know you knocked an art history degree on the head, I think, after one term, didn't you? To come and do a fortnight at the Express and then stay for a few years. Did it live up to your expectations? You were lucky to get into print so quickly in the context of.
But I was happy to do anything.
Yeah.
I remember I was helping. I would go and I dressed up as Chewbacca for someone. I remember doing like zorbing for someone.
You didn't actually zorb? Did you zorb?
I think I did.
It says here you researched the zorbing.
I can't remember.
So I think my wife did the actual zorbing.
Did she? Okay. Well,
I think you set up the zorbing trip.
I didn't even.
You'd remember if you'd zorbed. You get in a big plastic.
I was drunk for quite a lot of the time.
That was not an uncommon condition in which to be. But I was with Lucy in Scotland in a car park.
Okay, so
someone had put. Yes, I don't know. Definitely, it's possible you both got a feature in the Express in roughly the same period of time. In a massive plastic ball being thrown down, bouncing down a big hill.
I definitely dressed up as Chewbacca.
Yes, no, I've got no issue with that. But it says in my notes
for journalistic accuracy.
I don't want to be fact checked, Bryony. This is this career-ending stuff. She did all sorts of runner jobs.
You're going to get me cancelled,
including research on zorbing, transcribing an interview with a drunk cabinet minister.
Yeah.
Goodness knows, that could have been anyone. And fetching teas. She also wrote the occasional piece on youth issues, which is a bit self-deprecating because you got quite a lot into the paper quite quickly. But anyway, I'll check with Mrs. O'Brien when I get home on whether or not the zorbing story has
Maybe
been...
we should go zorbing.
It could now is the time to go twin zorbing. Double zorbing, I don't know. It oddly never really caught on. You don't see people zorbing to work, do you? or anything like that. But I mean, because I started on the gossip column, where you never got a byline. So I do remember. By the time you arrived, I think I was getting bylines. But to get bylines at such an early age, you would have known that this was exciting. This was a
really
great position to be in.
My mum used to come home. We knew when my mum came home in a good mood from work, me and my sister would say to her, "Mummy, did you get a picture byline?
You got something in today." Yeah.
Yeah. And that was it's a bit tragic now when I look back on it.
It's odd, as I've mentioned at the beginning, to be talking to you from this twin knowledge of knowing you in those days and then knowing quite an awful lot about you from your subsequent work. So we'll get to the struggles that you were dealing with when you were on the Express that perhaps some of us weren't fully or at all aware of. But let's back up a little bit to what you thought as a little girl was just anxiety or just excessive worries, but which we now know was really nascent OCD. What sort of things were presenting?
So again, it's weird to think about my childhood because on the face of it, I had a very happy, idyllic middle class childhood. Lived in a terrace house in West London. There was a Volvo, private school, all of that. But I think back to my childhood, and I was in a perpetual state of terror. I was worried about things that I think childhood is quite frightening.
Yes.
I think it really is, and I think we underestimate that. And we often dismiss it as well. I always remember my daughter saying to me that she was scared of mosquitoes when she was about 4, and I instinctively wanted to go, "Don't be ridiculous." Yeah. But it was a real thing that she feared, and I feared things like nuclear war, flooding. There were things that I'd picked up reading about, and I'd picked up on the news or seen in newspapers. But I was also really frightened of other bizarre things like aliens in the attic. Or I remember when I was about 11, I thought I was pregnant with an alien, which looking back was not normal.
No, and we're talking like nail shredding anxiety, not just passing.
No, like really the only thing I could focus on. Like the only thing I could focus on. And then it sort of, I would like to say culminated, but the moment I feel where it really passed over from sort of nail shredding anxiety into some like a full-blown disorder, I was about 12, and I woke up one morning and I was convinced that I was dying of AIDS. It was just that was all I that was all I knew. And I don't know, at the time, it was about 1992, there was this incredibly shaming public health campaign about AIDS and HIV and don't die of ignorance and all of that.
Yeah, of course.
And I became convinced that I had HIV, but I didn't know it. And I was going to pass this on to my family. And if I didn't have it already, I was going to catch it from, I couldn't, a sofa that was red I couldn't sit on because I wouldn't be able to see if there was blood. And I would wash my hands obsessively until they started bleeding. And I just remember this absolute, and it chills me to think about it. It was Christmas, and I remember seeing all my friends getting excited about Christmas, and I remember thinking, I wish I could be carefree.
Yeah.
Someone the other day, I used the word carefree about something the other day, and someone said, "Have you ever felt carefree, Bryony?" And I was like, "No, actually, I've never. Only when drunk."
Sure.
But so anyway, I remember just envying that feeling of just being a child and
just completely in the moment.
Yeah, and I was like, I'm going to die and my family don't know it, and if I don't die, I'm going to kill them, so I would sleep with like my toothbrush under my pillow, and then I would have to say all these phrases to make sure they were safe. So I had a much younger brother who was born when I was 12, and I would say, I'd rather I died than my brother. I'd rather I died than my brother. Again, like to this day, at the age of 43, I can still, there's still sort of like little internal jukeboxes that loop round and round, even though I know that they have no bearing on whether any of us live or die. But that was, and I didn't know what OCD was then.
Did people not notice?
I think that my parents thought that I was going through some sort of weird adolescent phase, and which of course, the irony is that I could have been.
Yeah.
We know that mental illnesses are incredibly treatable if you catch them early, like physical illnesses. If you or I were to get a diagnosis of diabetes type 2 and we changed our diet and we took the medicine and we got exercise, we'd probably live long and healthy lives. But if we don't, we might end up with our foot being amputated. And it's the same kind of prognosis for mental illness. Over time, without treatment, they become, you become like a sort of magnet picking up metal shavings, and they snowball to bigger and bigger things. And that was certainly my experience.
So we know now that it was OCD.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was, I'm just different.
Those are
freakish.
They're not even letters that I'd even heard.
Course.
I don't even think people used OCD as a sort of colloquialism for cleanliness back then.
No, it was a figure of speech for people who wanted all their tapes to be rewound to the
beginning.
Yeah.
And people still,
that's true. That's very true.
Make jokes. And it was only, I think it was 1997, it came back really badly. And this time it had morphed into this kind of thing that I was terrified that I might have hurt someone and like blanked it out in horror. So I was scanning the papers to check that no one in Chiswick, where I lived, had been murdered. I don't know what I thought. I'd killed them on my way home from school. Like, I don't know. And at the time, there was this, I was doing my A-levels, so there was stress. And at the time, there was this movie out called As Good As It Gets. I don't know if you remember, Jack Nicholson played someone with OCD, and he very much played it for laughs, and he won the Oscar, and he went up to the stage and he didn't step on any of the cracks, and it was all of that, ha ha ha. And I remember, again, this is when newspapers came in and the power of newspapers, that The Guardian in the G2 section, they had written a piece about OCD and how it was actually a much more complex illness than the one portrayed in this movie. And I remember reading about these subsets and things like Puro and going, oh my God, that is what is going on in my head,
Was that a relief?
It was a momentary relief.
Yes.
But OCD is sort of often referred to as the doubting disease.
Of course,
so you go into these kind of spirals of, maybe I don't have OCD. Maybe I'm actually a criminal mastermind using it as an excuse.
So even in the kind of intervening years between flare-ups, you still wouldn't have called yourself carefree. You still carried like lower levels of tension and anxiety.
I would have called myself carefree to people. I would have publicly at the age of 21.
Back, knowing,
but never.
So how hard was it to put your face on in the morning, particularly when you arrived at the Express?
Well, it wasn't so much that it was hard to put. When I talk about these things now, I don't think anyone, and I'm sure that anyone listening who has ever experienced mental illness will know this. It's often not. You don't consciously have to put on masks. You're doing it without sometimes even knowing that these things exist.
Of course.
So many mental illnesses are illnesses of denial.
And the misconception from people on the outside is that there are sort of shifts and switches. It's a constant.
And also
state.
And also your all of these illnesses thrive by telling you that you don't have them, and they thrive in isolation, right? So it's like even now I can find myself saying, I had a period over the pandemic, like many people, where I struggled a bit with my mental health, and I remember in my head I was like, you're not experiencing depression, Bryony, you're just a dickhead.
Right.
Yeah. And it took me quite a long time to unpick and realise that voice was the voice of depression itself. So I think you're not aware that these things are things. You're just, or that there is even an alternative way of being. Because when they're so baked in and they're all you've known.
Of course, you haven't got a concept of the alternative.
And the masking techniques of just.
Yeah, that's what I meant by putting a face on. I didn't mean.
Oh no, I know,
like
no, I don't.
Conscious effort to strap on.
No, but I think people.
Masking is exhausting as well, constant and exhausting. What did you do then with the information when you saw that Guardian article?
Well, my mum had left it out, so she'd obviously picked up on stuff, and so I was very lucky to have quite an open. I am lucky to have quite an open mother. So she took me to the doctor, and the doctor sort of said, yes, this sounds like OCD. I mean, also like how I told that doctor that I had this thing that told me that maybe I was a serial killing paedophile.
This was your fear.
Yeah. So just to explain OCD to people, I describe OCD as your brain refusing to acknowledge what your eyes can see. So that your hands are clean, or that the oven is off, or that the bump in the road you've just gone over is a speed bump and not a child. And there's a type of OCD which is referred to as puro, which is about thoughts. So we all have thousands of thoughts every day. We are not our thoughts. And we all have intrusive thoughts. So like all of us have been to a party, someone hands us their baby, and you think, what if I was to just throw the baby on the floor?
Yeah. Or the tube comes into the station.
Or the tube comes in. What if all of that? And most of us go, well, of course I'm not going to do that. And they dismiss the thought and they get on with their day. Someone with OCD will be so distressed by the idea that they may act on the thought that they will ruminate on it to try and get rid of it. But of course, this just makes the thought bigger. So that's the kind of OCD I had, which basically told me that maybe I was a serial killing paedophile. And how I managed to vocalise that to this GP, I mean, he didn't call the police, and he did say, yeah, I think that sounds... And he said, well, why don't we see how you are in like 3 weeks' time? Or 4 weeks, I can't remember what it was. But a period of time that I knew I was not going to get through.
Yeah.
And he said, let's see how you are in 3 weeks' time. And then if you're still bad, we'll put you on some antidepressants. And I remember... my mum saying, okay, thank you. And off we went to the car park, and I just collapsed. I was like, I can't go on for another 3 minutes.
I can't keep this up.
No, because when you're in that place, like a minute feels like an hour, and an hour feels like a day, and a day feels like a month, and so on.
And also, you explained it all to someone new for the first time.
Yeah.
And that probably should have felt like a release.
Yeah.
And it obviously didn't, because he just said, all right, off you go. We'll see you in a month.
This was 1997.
So
right?
It's not the GP's. Was it just a GP?
It was a GP. Yeah. But, to be honest, here we are nearly
27
a long time.
27 years later, yeah.
Right? And to be honest, not much has changed.
Is that right?
If you go along, if you take a child along, if you were brave enough to go to the GP and say, I think I'm suffering from a mental illness.
Yes.
Your options are antidepressants or being put on a very long waiting list for talking therapies.
Yeah. Occasionally an endless. I mean, with no guarantee that you'll actually see anyone at the end of it.
Get to the front of it.
Yeah.
And that's, and that is not... I can't think of any other sort of form of illness that would have such a sort of shocking lack of progression in terms of treatment plans.
No, and where possibly other illnesses this would apply to, but where the gulf between people who can afford to go privately and find help privately and people who can't is absolutely immense, which is compounded by what you've described about the analogy of the magnet picking up filings, because the longer it goes untreated or unrecognised, the worse everything would get. I wasn't sure which way you were going to go then when you referenced 1997. I thought you might say, and obviously in 1997 this would be quite a rare experience for a GP, so you can't blame them for not knowing what to do. And thank goodness things are much better now. But I guess a large part of your evangelical drive, your missionary drive, is to highlight the fact that it's still crap.
It's still crap, and it's not just that it's crap. I think it's actually got worse over the last.
Do you really?
Since the pandemic?
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely, because a number of things happened over the pandemic, whereby obviously there was a physical illness that was killing large amounts of people, and so we all felt that we had to grit our teeth and smile, and we couldn't complain, right? So there was that, but also the availability of, so mental health just fell to the bottom of the pile, and I think you have this combination of that with more people knowing what's going on and wanting treatment, and there's just not enough treatment available. No. There are not enough. You have mental health services working at absolute capacity and no doubt at great risk to their own mental health.
Yeah. People. I mean, I've had calls from people working in the sector who are now off with mental health issues.
And then what you have is a kind of a society that really lacks kind of empathy. Yeah. So we talk about things like, you saw it the other day with the interview with the work and pensions.
Mel Stride.
Yeah, who said
day-to-day ups and downs.
Yeah, and I think to myself, the idea of a generation of people who are prioritising their emotional well-being over the economy. Yeah. It's sort of, imagine that.
That was on the front page of your newspaper, that interview. So, the people that...
Well, it's not my newspaper.
Well, no, I know, but
I don't own it.
Thanks for clarifying that. It's the newspaper where you've done, the bulk of your work for 20-odd years. And yet, despite your extraordinary success in this field, the people putting together that front page, they're your colleagues and to a degree your friends, and they're putting together a front page as profoundly offensive as that. Now, I started in newspapers and I'm the son of a newspaper journalist as well, so I do know how it works. But I would find that very depressing. I would want to go and slap someone on the news desk, metaphorically speaking, and say, have you not read a single word I've ever written? How can you possibly treat this man's comments as if they are helpful or sensible or fair?
I think this is what I said, it's got worse.
Yeah.
It's got worse in all sorts of ways. And, they're reporting what this man said, and it's kind of important to know. Yeah, it's important to know that the government...
Secretary of State for Work and Pensions is actually thinking that people turning up at the doctors are just saying, I'm feeling a bit blue, and they get signed off work on £5,000 a week or whatever. Yeah,
and I think also the interesting thing is that what Mel Stride is kind of referring to is that we've gone, and this happens in anything, right? If you go from nobody talking about anything for decades and decades, centuries, right? And suddenly the pendulum swings the other way. Yeah. And actually, eventually, you do go back to somewhere in the middle,
Of course.
But the idea that I also think what they don't talk about is the lack of provision.
No.
That the government have provided. Like if you want to get people back to work, fucking provide them with.
And there's an economic argument for that.
Yes.
It's quite a powerful economic
Well,
argument.
I've always said that if you the greatest, just invest money into mental health services, in prevention, in teaching kids about it, because I tell you what, the benefits you will reap elsewhere are absolutely fucking huge. You will have fewer people in prison,
Yes.
you will have fewer unemployed, you will have more people turning up. A happy country is a healthy country, and vice versa.
And you will never meet anyone who is unable to leave the house in the morning who would quite like to stay in that situation, please.
No one chooses to feel like this.
And yet, that's, as we know, that's the narrative. It reminds me a little bit of immigration sometimes. Well, in the last week it has, because I keep hearing, I don't mean you. So it'll be like, we've got this massive problem with these people. And you'll say, well, I'm one of those people. And I go, no, I don't mean you.
Who do you mean?
Those ones over there in the newspaper.
Also, if these people didn't exist, we'd have to invent them, because what people need generally is a group of people that they can malign, so they feel much better about themselves. It's what you see with the obese.
Yes, of
it's
course.
What you see. I get so many messages from people saying to me, I'm really concerned about your joints because I'm a larger lady, and I'm like, you're not concerned about my joints.
Concerned about my joints.
You don't give a shit about my joints.
Yes.
What you're concerned about is feeling smugly superior today.
Yes.
And I'm like, fine, if I'm being of service to them, great. Like, that's how I've had to go now, and just be like, if it wasn't me, it would be someone else.
Well, that's probably the most philosophical way to approach it. Let's go back to the car park then after the GP interview. And so you say to your mum, I can't do this. I can't come back in a month.
So she took me back into the GP's surgery, and he prescribed me Prozac.
Right.
And, and that was that, really.
Yeah. So you're 17.
Yeah. I was 17 and I went on the Prozac, and it did help. It gave me this sense of hope. I've been on antidepressants ever since. And I suppose they've been the only kind of constant form of treatment that I've ever that I've had over the years. Certainly my longest relationship.
But you weren't properly diagnosed until you were 34, so it was another lifetime, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how I do know how I managed to exist and thrive even, and that was because of alcohol and drugs. They were my kind of solution, Which is what you detail in your first book, really, it's sort of a memoir. Yeah. Really, The Wrong Knickers. It was about my sort of crazy 20s. Yes. And I wrote it when I had a tiny babe in arms, And so I really thought, I'm past that. Did you? Yeah. Again, denial. Not denial, hope, I'd have thought. Or possible sort of optimism, at least. Yeah, I suppose that's another way of looking at it. But I thought, my 20s were pretty... So they were. Wild. Yes, they were wild. And as with a lot of people, caught up in substance abuse and addiction, you're talking about peaks and troughs. You're talking about big highs and incredibly low lows. Yeah. And you're sort of aware of what's going on, but not aware at the same time. But in your case, it's compounded with the mental health. Where did the impetus come from? I didn't realise that you thought you were kind of out of the woods when you started writing it. What were you hoping to achieve when you wrote that book? Did you, or is that? I wanted to make, it's like anything I've written. I wanted to make other people feel better. Yeah. Okay. So when did that kick in? Because when you were writing about not liking Easter, that wasn't a motivation. So when did your journalism evolve into having a crusading, and I mean that in the best possible way. When I had my daughter, and I knew that I remember, I don't know, I definitely shifted and thought. I remember writing The Wrong Knickers, and obviously the publishers were hoping for a sort of romp, you know. But I remember definitely thinking as I was writing it, like definitely the motivation behind it was to make other people feel better, because I felt so shitty and so ashamed for all of my 20s because I couldn't hold a relationship down, and I wanted to have a relationship, and I just had ended up in some really seedy places that I, you know, knew as a kind of feminist I shouldn't have ended up in, you know, and I kind of wanted to detail that. And so, and I still get messages about that book. That book came out 10 years ago, and I still get messages from people. I got a message yesterday from a 23-year-old girl going, "Thank you so much, that's made me feel so much better." And I sometimes feel like I've sort of chronicled my life through my book, sometimes like almost live as that is, it's kind of happening. But that was the first time I experienced this, like writing that book, and then I think quite a lot, and I think OCD is responsible for this. We talk in OCD about people with OCD seek reassurance, right?
Constantly. And you're not supposed to give it.
You're not supposed to give it. And I do think sometimes my entire career has been an exercise in seeking reassurance and saying, I've done all these terrible things, almost confessing, because confessing is another piece of OCD. Confessing it all and going, look, are you sure you like me? Because I've done all of this. Are you sure you still like me? And weirdly, what I found is people have gone, oh, actually, we like you a bit more.
Yeah. It can be both, can't it? I mean, you can be saying, look, I've been through this, and if you're doing something similar and going through something similar, you're not alone, you'll be okay, which are probably the two most important messages people can hear in life. But at the same time, so that's me looking from the outside. If you're looking from the inside, you're thinking, I'm okay, aren't I?
Well, I always think it was like the first piece I wrote about OCD, which was when my daughter was very young, and I was going through another awful episode, and it felt the worst. Each OCD episode feels like the worst, but it felt like the worst because my brain had turned on, had I hurt my child, you know, which is just unspeakable and horrible. And I remember going into work and sitting at my desk and just feeling permanently on the edge of tears and thinking, I can't do this. And I remember writing my column about this type of OCD I had and thinking, if I put this out there, then either the police will come and get me, and at least then they've come and then it's done and it's over and I'm out of the, you know, or they won't, and other people who have this type of OCD might get in touch, because I'd heard all the time that people had this illness, but I'd never met anyone who admitted to having it. So it was a bit like me saying, if you've got this too, will you get in touch? And to the credit of the Telegraph, they printed it, and I couldn't believe how many people got in touch. I mean, we're talking thousands. Right. It was unbelievable. People saying me too, and if not OCD, then some other form of mental illness.
Well, what happened at the paper? Did anyone say to you, are you sure you want to publish it? Or was there any conversation?
No.
Like just straight through?
Yeah.
Straight past the subs?
Well, yeah, I think they just
flew into the paper.
Yeah, because it was like...
And then everyone saw the response. Everyone saw and you realised that you had not stumbled, that would be entirely the wrong verb, but you had ignited something extraordinary.
And none of this has been planned or contrived. It was out of desperation.
You had to write that column.
Yeah. And then the books that have come since were like, and you know, and every time I've written, I've got a bit better. Like, I wrote Mad Girl, which was my second book, about my experiences of OCD, and what happened after that, and how huge that book became, and the sort of campaigning journey it sent me down. It was through that I realised I had to get sober, you know. Yes. And so it's like each time I met more people that when I write a book like this, I'm sort of going, look, this is what has been going on in my brain recently. Has it also been going on in your brain? And if so, shall we just sort of congregate around this book and we can talk about this and feel less like freaks.
Yes.
You know, we can feel like we're not mad, or we are mad, and that's okay, but we're not bad. That's the kind of driver, you know.
And it works until it doesn't.
It works because it makes, you know, but it's all part of. And for some reason, I don't feel any shame talking about this stuff publicly. In fact, it's how I kill the shame. You know, shame dies when you expose it to the light. So I feel like, yeah, it's how it's about connecting with people constantly. Yeah,
and so it becomes a natural evolution then into setting up mental health mates, into doing the podcast that you did. You start winning clutches of awards because you're moving into a space that nobody was in before, which is bizarre because it brings you great fulfillment and success.
Yeah.
But it's all built on something which presumably you'd rather not have.
Well,
or not.
I do. Yeah, obviously I'd rather not have had a life of OCD and thinking I'm the worst person in the world. Like, clearly. But I'm also, you know, there's no point, there isn't a parallel universe that I know of where that exists. So again, it's like, course. So in my mind, life for me is about taking negatives and flipping them into positives, you know, and I have been tremendously lucky. You know, I have resources around me, I've had help, I've got friends. So it was a weird situation. I remember 2017 was like the weirdest year of my life. So Mad Girl went to #1 in the Sunday Times bestsellers chart. I interviewed Prince Harry on that podcast. I ran a marathon and raised, I think, something like £40,000 for a mental health charity. And on the surface of it, I could not have looked. I mean, I've never looked so successful in my entire life. But that was also the year that I found I took myself to rehab, because behind the scenes, the drinking, it was like the higher the career went, the more the drinking. Because it was like I couldn't believe it. You know, I was like, me? People like me? You know, it was self-sabotage. And I knew that I was going to destroy it all if I carried on drinking and taking drugs. So I also that year had a massive rock bottom, you know. And
3 years later, you wrote Glorious Rock Bottom, which detailed this period, which looked back over this period.
Yeah.
What are the sort of milestones, Bryony? When because Mad Girl went bonkers, that changed everything.
Yeah.
And then, as you say, 2017 was the kind of year where all your boats came in a way to the outside world, or all your boats. So there's two tracks, isn't there? There's the public achievement and the private pain, and the peaks seem to meet. So you have a public achievement peak and you have a private pain peak at roughly the same time, and that's stayed. Why did you want to set up the charities? Why was doing the writing not enough?
Mental health mates.
Yeah.
Because just, again, desperation. Like
right.
there was nothing. I mean, there still is very little. I remember I had got to that stage where I realised exercise did help with your mental health. I was like, I'd got to the point where I was like, oh no, alcohol and drugs, this combination, no matter how much I want this to be the cure for my mental health, I'm going to have to accept
it's not working.
It's not working. And I remember just being out one day, running on Clapham Common, and I was listening to a podcast about Carson McCullers, who's this author who wrote this book called The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. And she tried to kill herself many times, and she died of alcoholism in her 50s. And there was this archive audio footage of her, and she said, sometimes it feels like everyone is part of a we except for me. And I remember stopping, partly because I was out of breath, but partly because these words kind of like winded me. Yeah. And I remember looking at the Common and seeing all these people, you know, blokes playing football together, women pushing their buggies together, not to get too like gendered, and the really strange people doing military fitness together. Yeah. And I thought, well, if we hear all the time about how good mental health is, exercise is for our mental health, and we know 1 in 4 of us will experience some sort of mental health issue each year, which means in my field of vision right now, there's like 10 people who are going to go through this, and however many people that love them who are also going to experience the effects of that. Why the fuck is there nothing for us? Nothing, like literally nothing. So I ran home and I said to my husband, I've got this idea where we'll go for walks and I'll put it on Twitter, as it was then known, and I'll get people to come along and we'll call it Mental Health Mates. And he said, what if a load of nutters show up? And I was like, that's the point. I don't know if I can make that joke anymore. Anyway, and that was, Mental Health Mates is still the most crucial. Like, keeping it going drives me. So I've essentially broken my leg training for the equivalent of 4 marathons that I was going to do over 2 weeks next month to raise money for Mental Health Mates. And now I'm like, fuck, how are we going to raise the money? So now I've just committed to I'm going to do a swim-a-thon because I can swim, but for me, because it's so important and I see how crucial it has been in transforming not just my life, but other people's.
So I think that's a beautiful way of putting it, isn't it, as well, saying everyone else has got a we. So you created your own, really. You just, and so again, we've got that sort of dichotomy between helping yourself by helping others, but also helping yourself. That's what all people, that's what it all, it's.
It
has to be.
All sort of philanthropy or whatever, what's the word? All kind of, I'm not, Warren Buffett or whoever, but, like all kind of charitable stuff. I think it all the
person who does it gets something out of it.
Yeah.
It's not, you're not doing it and going, this is
acts
awful.
of service.
yes,
like
exactly.
in 12-step programs, we talk about acts of service and like, if you want good self-esteem, do esteemable things.
That's nice. Yes.
And I think that's a really important thing.
I want to zip along because I want to talk about the new book, Mad Woman. But we happened upon Glorious Rock Bottom. There are episodes in that book which I would be uncomfortable reminding you of, but you write about them with absolutely unflinching clarity.
Yeah.
Because you need to describe the rock bottom.
I mean, I don't know if I'd write that book today.
Why not?
Because there are things in it I don't particularly want to, I go, oh, bloody hell, Bryony.
Yeah, so do I.
Coming round and someone's head between my legs while I was, my family slept in a,
Yes.
And because I don't like that version of me.
Right.
I really don't like that version of me. I still feel a lot of shame about her. And I have to remind myself of that, not on a daily basis, but reasonably regularly. Because otherwise, I feel I'm in danger of picking up a drink.
I'd say it's a warning to yourself of what might happen if you did.
Yeah, because there are still times where my brain, I'm nearly 7 years sober.
Yes.
And there are still times where my brain goes, wouldn't it be, like, I can see why I drank now.
Yeah, sure.
Like, life is fucking hard.
Yes.
And alcohol was a bloody brilliant solution to life's problems until it became the problem in itself, right?
Yes.
And I can't tell you how much, on a daily basis, you go through those and you think, oh, God, I can't even have a glass of wine, Because
if you had one, you'd have 85.
Yeah, but then I'm like, oh, don't be ridiculous. Like, it's like, people are like, oh, it must be really hard being sober. And I always say, it's not as hard as the alternative, which is being drunk.
Yeah, let's unpack that a bit if we can. Because, it is and it isn't. Being drunk or dealing with full-on addiction go on.
It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
And when people that believe that addiction is not an illness and it's a choice, again, why anyone would choose to.
You'd be a rubbish phone-in host. You're not supposed to be nuanced and thoughtful. It's a lifestyle choice, James.
Now I've lost my.
No, I'm talking about the idea that, in a sense, it's easier to be sober because
they talk about willpower.
Yes, exactly.
Have some willpower, right? The amount of self-will it requires to stay in that fucking state, on a daily basis, is off the scale. And the trick to getting better is to surrender that willpower or whatever it is, you know, and go, well, look, the way I'm trying to do it is clearly not working. I'm going to have to do it someone else's way.
And that's going to involve getting clean.
And it's about humility.
Yes.
It's about going, I'm fucking this up. This does not work anymore.
Which brings us really to the beginning of lockdown, doesn't it? Pretty much. So 2017, you got clean.
Yeah.
2020.
2020.
The book came out.
4 years ago.
It is, yeah. It's hard to keep track, isn't it? And then, so March 2020, things started unraveling in a slightly different direction for you, which is where Mad Woman comes in, isn't it? Where the new book sort of takes up the tale.
So I definitely was 2.5 years sober when lockdowns opened up, and I was so relieved to be sober because I thought,
could you imagine if I wasn't during this?
Yeah, and you see a lot of people who have, you know, who talk about knowing that they had to get sober during the pandemic, right? But I was so relieved that I sort of, again, I was also so adamant I couldn't pick up a drink, you know. I sort of didn't realise that I'd fallen headfirst into like food addiction, which is binge eating disorder, which is, you know, I will not be the first alcoholic to get sober and cross addict, and I will not be the last. But it was also a sort of the start of a period where I really felt a great amount of shame that something else was wrong with me, you know?
Yeah.
And I thought, people, again, it was that thing, you're not depressed, Bryony, you're just a dickhead. Like, why can't you just be okay? You're hugely privileged. You have everything. You know, just fucking shut up. There are people dying out there. So that was kind of my brain. And I mean, I'll tell you, that's not a helpful way to deal with this stuff. But I totally unraveled a bit. And the interesting thing about the pandemic was, I remember it did occur to me, I remember my husband saying, I think maybe you're depressed, Bryony. Okay. And I remember saying to him, of course I'm fucking depressed. Like, everyone, like, it was the first time that I'd felt depressed and looked out and seen that everyone else was too, where I didn't feel alone in my depression, right?
Yeah.
And that had this germ of an idea where I thought, well, hang on a second, what if mental illness, what if mental health, what if the mad among us are actually the most sane? Like, what if all my life, all of this stuff has been in a perfectly appropriate response to living in a world that essentially doesn't want me to accept myself as I am, you know, a patriarchy, whatever you want to call it, right? And I sort of started to think about that, and I started to think about when I was having treatment for binge eating disorder, and I sort of started thinking about diet culture, and, you know, and just all of the insidious stuff that comes in, and that we think we're better at it today. We are not, by the way. You know, it was all stuff about gut health and blood sugar spikes. I'm like, my blood sugar is supposed to spike when I have a donut. Like, there's, you know, it's just this kind of this obsession. And I was like, and I started to think, God, it's a miracle I've ever had any periods of normal eating in my life, or that any woman does, you know? And I started to get quite angry. And then I got a very bad episode of OCD again that attached itself to like my drinking, so to sobriety.
Right.
So it started saying, maybe you're not sober. Maybe this water has gin in it.
Yeah. Does that, when it comes back after a good old stretch, does it start as a whisper and then get louder?
Yeah.
And you recognise? And
then within moments, you're down to being like, are you Fred West? Yeah. You know, like, it's like, oh God, fuck, how did this happen? Dear. So anyway, someone said to me, have you thought that you might be perimenopausal? And I said, oh, fuck off. I said, I'm too young. And they went, Anyway, it turned out I wasn't too young. And I was perimenopausal. Like, I had, like, The Rock has more estrogen than I did at that time. And I went on HRT, and within 2 days, I was like the Disney princess with, like, the birds flying in. And then I went on the progesterone bit, which you have to do like halfway through the cycle. And I was suicidal again for 2 days. Anyway, all of this, we unraveled sort of progesterone intolerance, PMDD, all of this hormonal stuff. And I thought the link between my hormones and my ability to deal with my mental illness is absolutely huge, right?
So you've discovered another, I say chapter of your story, but you've discovered another field which is largely unexplored.
Yeah, massively.
And unexplained.
Yeah, and I kind of felt like, the mad woman of this book is like, yeah, you're damn right I'm mad. I'm fucking furious. because I remember the doctor saying to me, progesterone intolerance, like 1 in 20 women have it. So she said, what was it like when you were pregnant? And I was like, well, I was under psychiatric care. And then the moment I gave birth, James, it was like I felt like this weight. I mean, literal weight. But like this,
Stop it.
This emotional weight. And God, I was like a Disney princess again. And she said, yeah, that's because the progesterone.
It's the same cycle. It's the same.
But anyway, and I just thought, oh my God, and so the subtitle of it is How to Survive a World That Wants You to Think You're the Problem. And it's like my way of saying to women, you're not the problem, babes, you're the solution.
And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm fairly confident you will. Probably more, the word woman is more relevant here than in a lot of your previous work. A lot. I mean, this is absolutely women. So mental health, for example, a boy could present and not be seen. OCD could be. Yeah. But this is, if men had a menopause, or if men had PMDD, or if men. I mean, this would have been addressed years ago.
It would be the only thing we spoke about.
Yes.
There would be shows presented by Jeremy Clarkson.
Yes, exactly that. And that's where some of the anger comes from.
Yeah. And
Jeremy Clarkson. I could commission that in a heartbeat. Could do it on a tractor.
So I do think, and you've got started to get this weird backlash to talking about the menopause, and lots of women as well, older women saying, "Oh well, I sailed through it," and I'm like, I'm so grateful that you had such a great fucking.
It's like saying I've never had flu, so flu doesn't exist, or whatever it may be. It's an extraordinary human reaction to somebody else's suffering. It's to say, well, I've never had that, therefore you must be lying.
I can't exist. Yeah. So I think it's great that we're talking about this stuff, and I think we will talk about it. It will feel like we're talking about it more, and eventually, like anything, hopefully we'll come back to some sort of central.
Equilibrium of sorts. What does success look like then? When you look back over 10 years now of being a very, very public figure, particularly in this space, is it the big rewards like the awards and the book sale? I
would have said it was like awards and book sales.
Yeah.
And I would be lying if I said those things didn't feel like success.
Help, don't they?
And they didn't feel like a drug to me sometimes.
Okay, yes.
Dopamine.
Fair enough,
hit.
Absolutely.
But truly, success is for me as like, on Thursday, I'm going to go to Cornwall with my family for a week, and I'm going to switch off my phone, and we're just going to have a bloody lovely time.
And you're going to be all right.
And I'm not going to drink, and I'm not going to. I hope I won't drink.
Sure.
And I won't.
Sure.
I won't wake up every morning going, "What did I do last night?
Yeah.
What fires did I set that I need to put out?" It's kind of success to me is like waking up and not immediately wanting to go back to bed again.
And that's what you're trying to share. Or at least, because I mean, there's other books that we haven't touched on where you specifically give more prescriptive advice, particularly for teenagers, and telling people that in order to avoid these pratfalls or to get out of these chasms of despair, try this, do that, be this.
Yeah, and I'll keep trying these things and let you know how it is.
I'm struck by, we touched on it a bit, the kind of negativity and nastiness that everyone in public life encounters. But if you're a woman, you encounter it more. And if you're very open about your suffering or your problems, you encounter it even more. And I hope this isn't a crass question, Bryony, but do you think when your OCD makes you so vile to yourself, it actually helps you a bit deal with other people's vileness? Other people's vileness is going to be slightly less hurtful than it would if you were a Disney princess all the time.
Maybe it's an interesting. It's not crass at all. I think actually what it does is it makes me take sometimes that vileness more seriously than I should.
Okay.
So it's like the OCD in my brain will grab onto any evidence that I'm the worst person in the world.
Yeah. Okay. So it's going to depend partly where you are on the scale of OCD
and
at that moment.
And but broadly speaking, where I've come to on it is that if someone like I feel very sad for anyone who has felt the need to sit down and type onto a computer how awful they think I am.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't ever do that. No. Even if I did think someone was
extraordinary,
awful.
Isn't it? I mean, it is, and it's a deeply tragic situation in which to find yourself. But that's easy to see when you're in your more rational, at your most rational.
But I have to kind of go, okay, this is.
I want to just touch, if we can, on the importance of this book and indeed all of your work to and you mentioned it right at the beginning, to the people who live with the people that you're writing about. So who do you want to read Mad Woman? Who are your?
Mostly I want other women to read this who at the moment are sitting there in their own sort of sweat and self-loathing, thinking that they're awful, thinking that they're worthless, thinking that they don't dare dream of doing like even couch to 5K. We're not talking Disney princess
running 2 marathons and
running
then
two
go from
marathons.
Brighton to London.
I want people to. I want those people that it's such a waste of our energy. So much of how we have been brought up as women. I was going to say in this country, but in the Western world, is. We do the patriarchy's work for it,
By beating yourselves up.
Yeah. And so this book is, I do think it's, and I do think that, but I was interviewed by someone the other day and they said, I read this book and I just thought, God, she's really self-obsessed. And I had to go,
whoa!
I had to try and not I had to go, oh.
Okay.
So I kind of have also got to the space where I'm like, if someone is going to think that, they're going to think that. And again, it says more about where they are in their understanding of mental health issues than where I am. And I did read a review that said that my career, that the saddest thing, the most tragic thing of all about this book was that my career was, entirely linked to being unwell. And I was like, actually, I think it's the opposite. It's like, for me, it's like with each book, a little layer of the onion comes off. Yeah. And I really firmly believe that if something comes up in someone, it's because you haven't fucking dealt with it.
Yes, of course.
So my thing is, I don't want people to have to live being unwell. I hate that for them, and my way of trying to be better and feel better is to kind of expose this shit to the light.
And I suppose to that end, we should talk about the big challenge or the now transformed challenge, because people who have listened to this, whether they have engaged with your work before or not, may now want to help you do the work that you do, may want to help you spread the word. So there's a Just Giving page, I think.
Yes.
So that's justgiving.com/crowdfunding/Bryony's Big Challenge. You were going, so you can't swim from London to Brighton, mate. Even I know that. Well, I suppose technically
it would take a very long time.
Turn right at Gravesend or something.
I think there are people that have done it. And I wouldn't put it past me to. So when this happened last week, so I was going to run the Brighton Marathon. Then over 2 weeks, I was going to run the distance between Brighton and London. And then when I got to London, I was going to run the London Marathon. And I was not going to do it fast. I was going to do it very slowly. And I was going to do it to show that I wanted to do it to show exercises for everyone and how transformative exercise is when you start doing it for the way it makes you feel rather than the way it makes you look.
Okay.
So for me, that's the key point, because so many women, especially, they do it to make themselves smaller.
Sure. Yes.
And
yes.
I'm like, no, take up space. You don't have to physically take up space. But when I started doing exercise for the gains and not the losses, for the way it made me feel, it just completely changed my life. I've done 2 marathons before this. I've done a triathlon. I did a marathon in my pants to kind of show as a size 18 to 20 woman, look, I can do this. You can too. And then we did Celebrate You a year later, where we had 1,000 women running through the streets of London in their pants, including Dame Deborah James and women with all different body experiences, to show like we're going to do this.
Yes.
You know, so for me, I'm really passionate about that, and mental health makes the ethos is very much moving for your mental health. So obviously the universe has said, no, Bryony, you're not, we're going to slow you down. We're going to put you on the sofa. But I said to the doctor last week, what can I do? And he said, well, you can swim. And I said, could I swim like a marathon? And he said, well, no, not even like Michael Phelps swims a marathon, 26 miles. You would, I don't think even the Channel is that far, but the equivalent is is swimming 10K.
Okay, that's pretty hefty.
So I thought we're going to go back to, so during Mental Health Awareness Week, which is May, we're going to go to a pool and do an old-fashioned 80s, 90s swim-a-thon.
Fantastic.
And I'm just going to swim as far as I can, and I want people to come and join me in their swimming costumes and not give a shit about what their bodies look like, and celebrate and move for their mental health.
And we find out about this at Mental Health Mates. We go.
mentalhealthmates.co.uk. It's not up there. This is an exclusive.
Is it?
Yeah, this is literally
my first ever.
How does it feel? So because the doctor said to me, well, you could walk in the boot, but I thought, I'm not sure what message that sends out. I thought, because if this challenge is as much about respecting your body and and listening to it, which is what so many of us don't do and have been taught not to do. I was like, well, I need to listen to it. So anyway, but I'm going to do it next year.
Mad Woman by Bryony Gordon is out now and available everywhere. Everywhere.
For all 3 million of you.
Lidl. It probably is, actually.
No, it's not in Lidl.
Well, why not?
I don't know, because supermarkets can't
get near them.
Not in hardback.
No, I guess not. Bryony Gordon, thank you.
Thanks for having me.